Podcast, Jared Halverson.
First of all, applause is really weird for me. I am the most average Joe, normal nobody, and I honestly feel so out of my league. I'm an introvert that the Lord keeps pushing out of his comfort zone. And as a result, here I am, but I feel like I'm surrounded by friends, and I'm grateful for that. Honestly, last year, that's applause for you. You guys deserve that applause. The fact that you would come and be blessed, come and be pushed, come and feel uncomfortable, and then stand with people that are uncomfortable in opposite moments than you're uncomfortable. That's part of our challenge. It was interesting last year, actually 2 years ago, the first time we had this Restore conference, Bill asked me to speak, and he told me I couldn't wear a tie. And I'm a white shirt and tie guy for the last 25 years, and so that was hard for me. I felt naked. I didn't have a tie to hide behind. And now I have to have a whole new wardrobe. I asked my wife this morning, I'm like, does this even look good? And she said, well, technically you're not supposed to wear light pants after Labor Day. And I'm like, what? When did this become a thing? I don't have to check the calendar. My wife still dresses me, and so here I am feeling slightly uncomfortable that I'm supposed to. I'm not as smart as most of the people here. I'm definitely not as cool as most of the people here. But I do love people. And that's one thing I hope is my qualification, that I have a hard time meeting anyone that I can't find common ground with. Now, last year, I was backstage, and Stephen Sharp Nelson, who is one of my musical heroes, was speaking. And I've never met him in person. And in his talk, which was beautiful, about overcoming burnout and so on spiritually, which I needed to hear, he said something about, now I'm going to use one of those Halversonian contraries. And I'd never had my name become an adjective before, so that was kind of interesting. And I didn't make up contraries, okay? This idea of paradox is as old as yin yang. It's old as Hegelian dialectics. This is kind of the fabric of life, is finding these paradoxes and these contraries. But afterwards, he was coming off backstage and I was going up, and I went up to him, gave him a big hug, and said, we've never met before, but when you said my name as an adjective, I felt like the freshman, the overwhelmed, awkward freshman who just met the captain of the football team, and he knows my name. Now, this whole thought of contraries comes from my favorite statement from Joseph Smith, that by proving contraries, truth is made manifest. And again, contraries are paradoxes. It's these things that don't seem like they should fit together, and yet somehow you force them to coexist and they correct each other. Okay? Others call them polarities. There's so many options of what you can refer to these things, but they're everywhere. And what I wanted to talk about today was one of the most important contraries we can seek to prove. And it's going to take some wrestling, okay? It's going to take a wide stance and a low center of gravity to try to figure out how we can accomplish both things when they seem mutually exclusive. They're not. And one of my favorite things about Christianity and the cross that symbolizes it is the cross is not two parallel lines. It's two perpendicular ones. That here at the core of Christianity, at the cross itself, is a crux, a cross, a contrary. As Chesterton, who is often known as the Prince of Paradox, said, the cross has at its heart a collision and a contradiction. Or we could add, a contrary. Now, to me, when I look at the cross and I try to take up the cross daily, this is what I picture. A vertical love of God that connects me to him, and a horizontal love of neighbor that connects me to everyone else. And I even try to do that in that order. I'll wake up in the morning and I'll begin my day in vertical devotion. I'll try to tap into transcendence and seek some kind of connection with heaven on the vertical axis. And once I'm tapped in and tied in, then my arms can extend as wide as the utmost heaven and gather people in. That's my taking up the cross daily. It's my equivalent of what William Blake described We are put on earth a little space that we may learn to bear the beams of love. The cross of Christ are the beams of love. And there's a vertical love and there's a horizontal love, but they cannot become mutually exclusive. As I wrestle with this, the vertical component of our discipleship, the horizontal component of our discipleship, there are so many ways that people have tried to divide us. And some say that I'm spiritual, not religious. I had a friend that once said, actually, I'm religious, not spiritual. And I'm like, I don't know if that's any better. I go to church because I seek transcendence. And for others, I'm engaged in the gospel because I want to give service. When you go to the temple, is it for worship or is it for work? Are we more interested about learning the gospel or living the gospel? Believing or belonging? And when God says the church is true and living, do we feel more strongly about one than the other when he feels equally about both? There's other ways to do this, and some of these can get fraught, especially in today's climate. Some people focus on the moral and others on the social. Usually that maps over the political spectrum of conservatives leaning one direction and liberals leaning in the opposite. Jonathan Haidt talks about the different values and the righteous mind, and how do you conceive of righteousness? Is it order or is it freedom? Because those two are hard to coexist. Is your focus on community or on individuality? Do you feel more comfortable with authority or exercising greater agency? And which of these two words defines you more at core? Is it obedience or is it empathy? And if you are even feeling a little uncomfortable that we're putting these on charts, on separate columns, you should feel uncomfortable about that because they're not supposed to be separate. We're supposed to prove these polarities. We're supposed to bring these contraries together and make them one. But here's the challenge. There will be some whose first verse to quote whenever they talk about the love of God is John 14:15, that if you love me, keep my commandments. And that's how love is defined, by my strict obedience to the laws of God. And not just my strict obedience, but everyone else's strict obedience too. And if you're not doing that you don't deserve God's love, and you certainly don't deserve mine. On the flip side, other people are quick to quote a different verse, also showing our love of God, but making it manifest by the way that we love other people in the same way that God loves them and us. And again, the fact, some people want to pit Matthew against John, or John against Luke, or all the synoptics against John. And I love that this is John with both verses, and it's actually quoting Jesus in both instances. That we have to figure out the vertical and the horizontal because they are not mutually exclusive. Carl Jung, who's one of my favorite psychologists, said that a religion becomes inwardly impoverished when it loses or waters down its paradoxes. But their multiplication enriches because only the paradox comes anywhere near to comprehending the fullness of life. At core, we are paradoxes. And if we can embrace that fact and grapple with it in so many different aspects of life, especially the religious life, I think in some ways we picture religion as supposed to make things easier. In some cases it does, but in other cases it makes things harder because it's grappling with these paradoxes. It's wrestling with opposites and forcing them more than to attract, but to truly to become one. Jung also said the conscious mind is not always either willing or able to put forth the extraordinary intellectual and moral effort needed to take a paradox seriously. Nothing is so jealous as a truth, which is why we need to have an opposite truth to counterbalance the truth that we're more wired to accept by default. The beauty to me of proving contraries, of finding opposites and living within that paradox, is the opposite view is what keeps my view from becoming extreme. Because as soon as my view becomes extreme, then that virtue flips over and becomes a vice. Think about what you love about yourself and then put that on steroids. Do you still love it about yourself? You might, but the people around you don't, okay? And same with the opposite side of things. We get so jealous about our truths, but there are complementary truths that form a higher and holier synthesis. That's what contraries are for. Unfortunately, we usually opt for this statement from the great French philosopher Simone Weil. There is nothing more comfortable than not thinking. And did you catch the image here? This sweet little child is on a teeter-totter, but she might as well be sitting on a chair because there's no one on her opposite. There is no need for tension here. There's no need for balance. And as far as she's concerned, she doesn't have to think at all about her position. And I think our challenge is we spend so much time in the comfort of not thinking, of not wrestling with things, of sitting on one side of an issue and feeling so secure because it's a true side of the issue. But without its countervailing truth, it will move closer and closer, inch toward untruth. And that's true on both sides of any issue. And unfortunately, I think you were clapping out of the last statement, not because of this picture. Yes, it's an election year, and brace yourself, right? Because there is going to be a lot of unthinking people in the world that are so convinced of one side of an issue, and that happens on both sides of every issue, okay? And part of the challenge is, if I could have one day in Congress, I would just try to teach congressmen to prove contraries, okay? To reach across the aisle and see, because there's a lot of unthinking going on in the world because I don't have to think about my issues because the other side isn't thinking about anything at all, okay? Unfortunately, if that's true in Congress, it's equally true at home. And sometimes it becomes divides within couples. Sometimes it's generation gaps between parents and children. I talked to an older man once and he said, the rising generation, why are they such idiots? And I just laughed and I said, it's because they're the opposite kind of idiot that you are. And because we deal with this, one side pushing to its extreme, feeling validated and justified in that, which forces the other person. It's almost like, you ever seen people hanging off the side of a ship because the ship seems to be leaning to one side? They're just grabbing some rope or some rigging, and they're practically in the water themselves. And we do that constantly because we're afraid that the ship is going to the other side, and we don't want it to fall. But they're afraid of us winning, and so they go in the opposite direction. Happens all the time. And as a result, we're never going to get to Zion until we figure this out. Because Zion is one heart and one mind. There's radical unity there. But we live in a time that has a hard time picking which of the other lines we emphasize. He said that one heart, one mind. They dwelt in righteousness. There was no poor among them. But can you sense a contrary there? Because in our day, this is what our Zion looks like. At least our failed attempts to establish it. And we'd have to quote the verse like this: the Lord could not call them his people or Zion because they refused to be of one heart and one mind. One side dwelt in righteousness as they defined that righteousness, and the other side made sure there was no poor among them as they defined poverty. And that never the twain shall meet. We'll never be Zion until we figure this out. I asked AI to help me with this, and I tried to put it, if you were one of the apostles at the Last Supper, would you be vertical or would you be horizontal? What aspect of discipleship draws you, calls to you? Would you be one partaking of the sacrament in a vertical way or reaching out horizontally to wash one another's feet? And I love the fact that AI is trying to tell me something here, that these apostles had one hand doing each. We have to become ambidextrous and live in both dimensions. You see, that is the crux of the cross. There's our collision, there's our contradiction. As we love God, as we love neighbor, we have to figure out simultaneity here. Otherwise, one side is going to say, hey, I'm here to be right, and the other side will, hey, I'm here to do right. We just saw a beautiful depiction of Adam and Eve dancing together as one. But so often there's this sense of Adam with the vertical. God said, don't eat the fruit. I'm not going to disobey. I've got to be right with him. And Eve said, okay, great, honey. Good luck with that. God also said, multiply and replenish the earth. And I'm wondering about how this is going to affect other people. So while Adam was trying to be right, Eve was trying to do right. And it's only until those two can become one that we're ready to move forward in the plan. It's not a matter of conviction or compassion. We need both. It's not devotion or diversity. These are never either ors, they're both ands. Whichever side you're naturally wired to lean in the opposite direction, you may have actually married your contrary. That's often the case. And that is an example of two wrongs making a right, okay? As Pat Holland, as the soon-to-be Patricia Holland asked her, she was freaking out right before she married Elder Holland, getting some cold feet, and she asked her dad, like, I don't know if I should do this, and her dad said, Pat, you have to marry Jeff. You two are perfect for each other. And she was like, really? You think so? You like him? You think it's a good couple? And he said, of course, because the rocks in his head will fill the holes in yours. And that's what contraries do, okay? Your side of things keeps my side from getting extreme, and vice versa, okay? So watch this. When Jesus says, when he explains the two great commandments, that the second is like unto the first, and this is a photo finish, the likeness of those two commandments is the crux of the cross. And until we figure out how to be there right in that celestial center, we will either be vertical disciples that make no difference in the world, or we'll be horizontal disciples whose efforts to lift people doesn't come very high off the ground. We have to figure out how to do the two. As St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross said, and I talk about a contrary, this is a Jewish Catholic, this is a philosophical nun. This is a perpendicular person, and I love what she says. Do not accept anything as truth that lacks love, and do not accept anything as love that lacks truth. One without the other is a destructive lie, and so many of us are living lies in the name of a one-sided truth. Who do you want to win this marital tug of war? Because what's the danger here? As soon as I pull my polarity, as soon as I pull my contrary onto my side, we both fall off. Zion will, I love that Jesus called a publican and a zealot to the same quorum of the 12. I wonder if he made them sit next to each other. Figure it out, boys. Okay? We have to work on this. I'll put it this way. Whenever I speak in mixed multitudes, like this one in many ways, I often joke, you can't see it under my shirt, but there's a six-pack there, okay? Not a literal one, I wish, but one because I am flexing every muscle to stay balanced, and that can be difficult. What's the strongest muscle for a gymnast? It's their core, and we need greater core strength as disciples of Jesus Christ. As I said already, the extremes is where virtues become vices, so we need each other to counterbalance. When Jesus says there must be no more and there must be no less of things, there's a balance that the Savior himself is trying to strike. So, as far as you vertical saints, please don't let your love of God become a dogmatism that damns all who disagree with you. And you horizontal saints, please don't let your love of neighbor become a relativism that eliminates even the possibility of absolute truth. Some of you are struggling with the more, others are struggling with the less. And Christ wants us to find that celestial center. I remember once teaching at the University of Utah a group about missionary work and how do we balance zeal with patience. Because when we're full-time missionaries, it's all zeal and no patience, and then we come home, and as member missionaries, it's all patience and no zeal, right? And so we were wrestling with that, and I was explaining the concept of contraries, and that too much zeal becomes overzealousness, and we're not doing anybody any good, but too much patience becomes apathy, and we don't ever start the attempt to do anyone good. And it had taken the whole hour. Class was almost out, bell about to ring, and I'm haunted by clocks, as many of you know, okay? Now, what ended up happening is a student raised his hand in the back and said, Brother Halverson, this sounds really important and really hard. So as I'm trying to figure out how to strike the proper balance in these contraries, which side should I err on? Great question. The essential question. I had no time to formulate a good answer because the bell's about to ring. So I just blurted out, just don't err. Okay, good luck. And then they went off. And I remember I was driving home and the Spirit's like, just don't err? You idiot. You royally erred in saying that. I mean, they understand how important it is and yet how difficult it is, and you gave them no wiggle room. Get it right the first time and no questions. And, tail between my legs the next time I came back to class. I show up and I say to the students, I don't know if you remember how I ended, but I ended with a hopeless remark about nailing it every time. And I've done some more thinking. Is there a safer side on which to err? Now, in this picture, obviously, I'm going to err on the mountain side, right? If I fall, it's like 30 degrees. If I err on the opposite side, there's no recovery. And it's the recovery that we should be seeking, because we're going to get it wrong over and over. And sometimes as we try to correct, we'll end up overcorrecting. That's kind of the historical pendulum swings. Here's the long answer to what I said to my students that second day. Err on whichever side best allows for ongoing adjustments, the determination of which will always be situation specific and therefore must always be Spirit directed. Now, I had a student say, isn't that just a really long way of saying err on the side of mercy? I said, touche, usually yes. But if it's suicidal ideation that the other person is wrestling with, physically or spiritually, you might not have a second chance to recover from your erring on the side of mercy. This, again, only the Spirit can help us navigate and direct which side of these things we'll be on. But here's my goal every time I prove contraries. And I work with people in faith crisis all around the world, and I prove contraries every single conversation. I try to be explicit and explain the concept for them so I can validate their position and help them know how important it is that they hold to that position while they seek its opposite side to keep them in balance, okay? I do this constantly. And so when we prove contraries, the goal is to get to the crux of the cross. We have to find that perpendicular intersection. We've got to strike the right balance. But as I'm working on that and wrestling with it, I always start on the side that's most likely to allow the other side to come into play. Now, there's some higher order thinking here. This is hard to wrap our heads around. Let me give you an example. I love the fact that 3 times in Christ's ministry among the Nephites, you have vertical disciples saying, we can't get this wrong. We have to do the right thing. I'm supposed to love God, and I love him by keeping his commandments, and so we have to baptize right, and we can't mess with church discipline, and we better get the name of the church right. And all 3 times, Jesus leads by saying, yeah, you're going about this all the wrong way. The fact that there are other views on this and you're fighting to make sure your view wins the day, you both have lost before the thing's even begun. There must be no horizontal disputation as various groups are trying to find the vertical line they're trying to climb. We have to eliminate that from the get-go, because the irony is there's righteous people in 3 Nephi 11 and 18 and 27. They have righteous goals, things that God does want them to get right, but they're going about it in a totally unrighteous way, and that's the deal breaker for Jesus. The ends, being right with God, do not justify the means, being wrong with other people. So I got AI's help on this as well. And you picture that celestial city off in the distance, and that's where we're trying to go. And yet notice the road. And I just picture, whether you're on the left, whether you're on the right, whichever way you're wired, whatever your destination might be, more moral, more social, whatever it is, imagine getting there and then looking to the back seat and all of your passengers have flown out of the window because of how bumpy you made the ride the entire time. I've taught similar principles before, and I had one very humble father reach out to me afterwards and said, I have been so vertical my whole life that I've alienated all of my children. And the thing I want most in life, and what I want them to arrive at more than anything else, they're nowhere near. Because I sacrificed harmony on the altar of what I thought was what I was supposed to do and what God wanted me to get them to. I'll put it bluntly, if you'll allow me. Some of us here have to keep in mind there is a destination. And others in here have to realize that there is an approach. And it's too easy to sit on one side of the teeter-totter and not have to realize that there are people thinking on the other side, trying to find this balance. So let me ask you this. I'll give you a quick example that I love. Jesus does this among the Nephites. He did it even better among the Jews, in my opinion. He says, if you bring your gift to the altar, here's a vertical disciple. I'm trying to do what's right. I'm going to go to the temple, bring my gift. Ooh, and right in that moment, I remember, I've got some horizontal friction going. I'm trying to be right with God, but I haven't been right with others. And God says, in that moment, leave your gift right here. Don't give it to me yet, but leave it, because I'm afraid if you leave to go fix things horizontally, you might forget that you had a vertical goal to begin with, okay? So leave the gift right here, and then go and first. This is the one that you're going to err on the side of in hopes to bring in the second half. First thing you do is be reconciled to your brother. And then, second step, coming after your gift. It's been waiting here the whole time. But now that you're right horizontally, you can be right vertically. You can't be right vertically if you've got issues horizontally. Vice versa is also true. When he says to agree with thine adversary quickly, some people immediately clench their fists, grit their teeth, and go, over my dead body. Agree with my adversary? Are you kidding me? And yet part of the beauty here is this is not just, yes, you're right, and I'm a yes man. It's be agreeable. That's what the Greek entails. Be agreeable with your adversary. Be approachable. Be understanding. Try to see things from their perspective. Prove that contrary. Validate their position. Because guess what? If you don't, they will throw you into prison over that perceived debt. And when you're in prison, can you pay even the uttermost C9? Once you are captured and captivated in their prison of mistrust and misunderstanding, you can do them no good in helping them get to whatever destination you had in mind. So, which side to err on? I want you to see this from Elder Renlund really quickly, and then there's a short video I want you to just see as I close. I love the fact that a vertical apostle is thinking horizontally here, and as they all must, right? Speaking the truth in love. Paul said that's an apostle's job. We do not need to ask unhelpful questions or state the obvious. We should not be judgmental, since our judgment is neither helpful nor welcome, and it's most often ill-informed. I think he's speaking to most of the older brothers of the prodigal son that's out there, okay? Our Savior's job is to heal, which leaves our job as one to love and minister in such a way that others are drawn to Jesus Christ. So which side do we err on? We err on the side of horizontal love in pursuit of vertical love, knowing that if this is in place, there's hope of helping shepherd them in a divine direction. I want you to hear from an expert for 2 minutes, and then I'll close. If we can run this video.
I decided that